Kia ora tātou. Look, apologies for the hesitant start there. Welcome everyone. My name is Rob Mill. I'm Senior Manager in the Ministry of Education. I have a background as a secondary teacher, principal for a decade or so, and I've been with the Ministry for the last 8 years. My primary role is at present, is to lead the review of achievement standards. So delighted to be here, and thank you for giving up your Saturday morning to participate in this discussion. Lauren.
Kia ora, I'm Lauren Burr. I have been with the Ministry for just 1.5 years now, and before that, some of you may have recognised my face from being involved in the maths community. So I was a maths teacher for 19 or 20 years here in the Wellington region. And so I came on board with Rob 1.5 years ago, and so I'm involved in the review of achievement standards and all things senior secondary to do with maths and stats.
Okay, right. Look, hopefully you've got access to the PowerPoint so you can sort of get a sense of direction of where we're going. What we'd like to do as we go through this is to pause at various stages to answer particular questions or comments from people. We will need to sort of manage this without offending people, so otherwise we could run out of time towards the end. So please put your questions in the chat. We'll try to address those first when we come to that pause for questions, and then and we'll welcome verbal questions if we have time. Okay, this is a learning experience for us, so we'll see how we go. Okay, so the first part, what we'd like to do is to reconnect on the review. It seems like a lifetime ago that this process started back in December of 2017, and gosh, how the world has changed since then. The Minister, in establishing the review, wanted it to centre on 5 key principles: well-being, equity and inclusion, coherence, pathways, and credibility. I don't want to go into too much detail around those because most of you will be really familiar with the background and what's happened since then. I just want to recap on a few things. Coming out of about a year of discussion with the sector, and many of you will have been involved in that, the Professional Advisory Group and the Ministerial Advisory Group alongside the Ministry came up with a number of changes which were adopted by Cabinet in 2000 and at the beginning of this year in February. So these are the 7 changes. In actual fact, when you delve into those, there's a lot more detail, but that's sort of 7 broad groupings of those changes. And it is important that you, when you're looking at those changes, you consider them as a whole package rather than as individuals. So as I mentioned, the Cabinet met on the 17th of February this year and agreed on the interim package which had been discussed the previous year. And they made a small number of changes to that, reflecting feedback through the year. One of those was there was earlier discussion around the literacy and numeracy co-requisite requirement, which initially had been suggested it would come into effect from year 7. Feedback suggested that probably wasn't a good idea, and so the government made that adjustment. Also recognised that for ESOL students that perhaps there needed to be something a little bit different, or different considerations for those, and Lauren will talk a little bit further about that shortly. There was quite a lot of discussion around resubmissions and the intent of limiting resubmissions to the not achieved boundary to to support teacher workload, reduction in teacher workload, and a focus students on getting things right earlier on. That will come into effect from 2021. So next year, and we'll need to continue to work with folk around making sure that they're got that on board. And lastly, the extension of the course endorsement, which is largely that course endorsement for achieved rather than just merit and excellence, will come into effect this year. And there will be further communication around that coming out soon. Okay. So what does this mean for the review of achievement standards? So the first one is making NCEA more accessible and inclusive. So basically, the key component there is that we need to think carefully about the range of learners that are engaging with NCEA. And so that comes from a point of view of gender, ethnicity, locality, their learning environment. And so we know that there is considerable inequities in our system. And so we need to be really mindful of all of those students and saying, let's not create barriers where they don't need to be. And so it's inclusion by design, but we've got getting lots of people to provide advice and support around that. And I'll talk a little bit further about that shortly. Mana Rīti o te Mātauranga Māori. So we're well aware that our education system has largely been centered from a European background. And so this is a deliberate intent to create a better balance to reflect New Zealand. So our learning material, our assessment standards, we want to put that strong Mātauranga Māori lens over it and be inclusive wherever we can. So we can emphasise, and so learners, particularly Māori learners, can see themselves in our education system more inclusively. One of the key changes talked about fewer and larger standards, and that translates directly into the achievement standard review, where each subject will be limited to 20 credits, 4 standards ranging in size from 4 to 6, 2 of which will be internals and 2 will be externals. Just a point to note, the externals does not necessarily mean that it's going to be an exam. These may well be assessed during the year, and there's a range of different modes there. But exams may well be the predominant form of external assessment. Largely, we will be seeking advice from our subject expert groups in that space. Key thing here is that literacy and numeracy requirements have changed quite considerably. And so instead of literacy and numeracy coming from our current standards as they do now as tag standards, that they are quite separate. And we know that's going to be interesting for maths folk, and we'll talk a little bit further about that very soon. Okay. One of the things that we're really anxious about is that NCEA is incredibly complex, but also really flexible qualification. And both of those are strengths and challenges. So one of the things that we wanted to do was try and make our structure for NCEA more understandable and more readily understandable for students and particularly parents and employers. I'm sure many of you will have attempted to explain how NCEA works to someone that isn't directly involved, and struggled to get the key messages across. So one of the problems we've had in the past is that we've got 80 credits at level 1, and there's 20 credits of those are literacy and numeracy, and then we've got carryover credits, and then when you get to level 2 and 3, you need, anyway, it was just really tough going, as I'm sure that you've all had those experiences. So the new structure, which will be fed through starting at level 1, will be 60 credits needed per level and no carryover credits. And literacy and numeracy assessed separately and don't count towards the 60. So it's a goes some way towards simplifying and making the qualification a little bit more understandable. One of the things that we're really conscious of, and I think COVID has brought that through to the fore, is that we need to be really thoughtful around pathways for students through our qualification. And from a review of achievement standards, what we need to be thinking about is not just the learning which needs to take place in a classroom environment, but actually how that can relate and link through to particular pathways, whether that's onto employment, onto tertiary engagement. What we're really mindful, particularly when we get to levels 2 and 3, is that may be the last time that students engage in that subject. So you know, what is that subject's contribution to a learner's pathway and options? And so we're working with a number of groups to provide advice there. And if all of our subject expert groups have tertiary and industry representatives to support that intent. The last one in that package of changes is, and it really focuses on the first one, that NCEA level 1 is an optional qualification. It always has been, but it's not always been seen as such. You know, New Zealand seems to be a rarity in the education system where we are fundamentally fixated about assessing students. So we have 3 levels of high stakes qualification in the last 3 years of their secondary education. And I think we're the only country in the OECD that manages to do that. So for some students, level 1 is really important, and you will be well aware of those, you know, students that's their leaving qualification. For other students, it's a motivator. And then for other students, actually, it just prepares them for level 2. Then there's a group for whom it may not actually be that necessary to put them through that, and a broader qualification without the assessment burden may be appropriate. And you'll probably be aware that there's a small number at this stage of schools which are choosing not to offer a full NCEA level 1 package. And that'll be interesting to see how individual communities think about that. But at the moment, the key thing that we are focusing on is that NCEA level 1 really needs to be a broad foundational qualification. And I'll talk a little bit further about that when we have a discussion around the provisional list of level 1 subjects. And then at level 2 and 3, increasing levels of specialisation. What that means is that we expect that there will be a larger number, even larger than currently exists, of level 2 and 3 subjects. So we really are creating a little bit of a pyramid, and level 1 is at the inverted end of that. Okay. And Lauren is going to talk about literacy and numeracy.
Okay, so it was recognised that we need to do literacy and numeracy a bit different. As you know, currently there are a lot of standards that are tagged for numeracy that, as maths teachers, we are concerned that they're not at a high enough numeracy level to actually show that they've got numeracy skills of the level they need. So last year we set up 2 technical advisory groups, and we worked with them on and off all year, looking at both literacy and numeracy and the technical requirements, but also looking at Te Marautanga Aotearoa and the equivalents in there. So reo awaha, tui tui, pānui and pāngarau. So you'll notice that, oh, let me see, yes. We do, under literacy, we're talking about reading and writing, but under the Māori curriculum, we talk about reo awaha, tui tui and pānui. You'll notice they actually have one extra under literacy. It's not a big deal, it's just that there's a little bit more emphasis on the oral language in Māori. But the key thing that we focus on is the numeracy and the pāngarau. It's interesting when I've set up the slides that it jumps up in different orders than what I told it to. So when we got, our technical advisory groups were pretty awesome, and they gave us some key design principles, and also we've worked with other people to go a bit further into depth on these. So we're looking at the literacy and numeracy both being on the borderline between levels 4 and 5 of the curriculum. That means they should have full control of the skills and content at level 4 and be working within level 5. Now, for those of you who understand the difference between unit standards and achievement standards and literacy and those numeracy, all of our achievement standards are designed to be assessing curriculum level 6. So you'll see that this is slightly lower. This allows the students to be able to access the more specific disciplinary knowledge at level 6 of the curriculum. It was decided also, or reinforced, that they need to align with the progression frameworks that are already existing. So Te Rewa Ako and the Learning Progressions Framework. Both are really solid frameworks that describe how a student progresses through literacy and numeracy. It's funny, in our team, I've switched it around and said numeracy and literacy, but they keep correcting it in our presentations. So there are our components that you can see under the New Zealand curriculum: the reading, the writing, and the mathematics. And then under the Te Marautanga o Aotearoa, rea waha, tui tui, pānui, and pāngarau. So where we are going with this year, they're actually looking at writing the new unit standards. And similar to the RAS, we have set up subject expert groups that are going to help with this work. Then next year, we'll be looking at how it's going to be assessed and the finer detail of that. So this year, purely the standards, next year looking at assessment. But the exciting thing is, all things going well, we're hoping to trial the new standards in the second half of next year. And so watch the advertising coming out hopefully later this year to express your interest in actually trialling our new standards. We're hoping that we can get a good range of schools across the country to help us with this. I'm talking mainly here about the NZC, literacy and numeracy. The TMOA work of the reo waha, tui tui, pānui and pāngarau is running alongside. In some ways it's actually slightly more advanced than the English medium stuff at the moment, but it's going to look a little bit different, but still running parallel. So the work there is really exciting. We've got some great teams working on that. And here's the first scary slide. Do you have any questions for us? I think the easiest way for you to do this is if you put your hand up, and I'm frantically scrolling on my other screen to see if anyone's hand's up, and then you can unmute and ask. Oh, I see a waving hand. Rosalie? Sorry, I probably said that very wrong.
Yeah, you said it right. Thank you, Lauren. I'm keen to trial the new standard. I'm just about to type it on the chat.
Great. Okay. Yes. Watch for that expression of interest. It's coming out. I can't confirm the date, but keep watching the. Thank you. Education Gazette. Now, I have a question that's popped up here from Janine. New numeracy standards are unit standards, not achievement standards. Yes, at this stage, that is what we are calling them, unit standards. They are pass or fail only. So there's no merit, there's no excellence.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Jake is waving his hand.
My question is, some of the initial information we were given was that those assessments would be online. Is that still the plan at this stage?
We are working towards digital assessment. That is part of the planning, but we will also make sure that we have got an analogue complement to go with it, because not everybody is going to have online accessibility. Can't give you any more details than that at the moment. We're still exploring that.
That's right. And will they be anytime, anywhere sort of assessments that was touted as where would be with all assessments from NZQA by 2020?
Really good question. We are exploring how that's going to come together and how that's going to work. I can't give you much information around that because we're still exploring it and we're still talking to the technical people who are giving us advice.
Cool, awesome, thank you.
Yeah. Fundamentally, in that space, we, the intent has always been that we need to make assessments available for teachers to put in front of students when they're ready, rather than having classrooms or halls of students doing online maths or paper maths literacy or numeracy assessment. That kind of, it's a assessment when ready kind of intent, and obviously that's a challenge, but the intent is still there.
Yeah. Sorry, one final bit. Currently there's portfolio type assessments with the unit standards for students who struggle in more test-like environments, or it works better for them. Will there still be an equivalent of that, or will it be the one size fits all?
And somebody else has just asked a very similar question about assessments being internal portfolio type. One of the things that was a key point that came through was people and the minister were actually really hoping that this would be externally assessed. So these will be external assessments, but portfolios, a limited version of them might be a possibility. As I say, we haven't actually fully designed what the assessments are going to look like, but we're going to take into account all of the advice that we've been given. And we are just aware that portfolios, just openly, blatantly saying create a portfolio, is very broad and it's very hard work on the teachers. And so there will be some style of evidence like that, but we don't have the details yet, and it's not going to be this broad, send us all of their work for the year portfolio that has happened in some cases. Okay, so running through the other questions just very quickly. Would maths potentially be offering more than 20 credits in level 1 with the 20 subject credits and the numeracy credits on top of that? Oh, they won't actually. Wow. I'll let you answer that.
Yeah, the literacy, the numeracy standards will be largely set at curriculum level 4, whereas the achievement standards for level 1 will be set at curriculum level 6. So there'll be a fundamental difference between those around that.
And yes, so the next few of you have actually asked very similar questions. It is highly possible that you'll be able to tick these off in years 9 and 10 with your students. Their curriculum level 4, early level 5. Therefore, yes, if you want to get them, as many of your students ticked off in year 10 as you can, great. But you can still do them in year 11. And in fact, you could still do them in year 12 and year 13. You just have to sit them at one time. You just have to pass them once during your 3 years of NCEA.
Yeah, the absolute intent is that for as many students as possible will get their literacy and numeracy co-requisite credits prior to year 11. We're also mindful that a lot of students currently do level 1 NCEA, start level 1 NCEA in year 10, and we kind of expect that is quite likely to continue in some settings. And so, you know, you could feasibly end up with, some literacy, some numeracy credits alongside some of the achievement standard maths credits. They will be different though.
And just to clarify, that's 20 credits in total for both literacy and numeracy. So the numeracy will be 10, the literacy will be 10. Maths will, does that mean that maths will not be compulsory in year 11? It's currently not compulsory in year 11. You just need to get your numeracy credit somewhere. So that's a really interesting question there. Do all students need to participate in this literacy numeracy, or can they still? There will be no tagged standards. So you can't do the level 1 math standards and say, great, we've got them, we can tick off our numeracy. Every student will need to sit some form of these literacy and numeracy. One of the things we're looking at the moment, as Rob flagged a few moments ago, is how we deal with students who are coming in from second language English settings, and how we deal with that, because that's going to be a slightly different system for the literacy, potentially. We haven't quite got there yet, but no, at the moment, every single student will have to sit these. There is no tagging going on anymore in the standards, which makes for a bit of a change for us all. Yes, there are 10 credits split across. We don't know how many standards at the moment. That hasn't been decided. And skills are application based. We haven't written the standards yet.
Okay, perhaps we should move on to the next section, but that was great, thank you. So what I'd like to do is focus particularly on the review of achievement standards. So that's a major undertaking which is going to take a number of years to work its way through. So the review of achievement standards will review, in fact, will replace every current achievement standard derived from the national curriculum. That is the New Zealand curriculum and the Maro or Aotearoa. So effectively, that's all subject matrices or achievement standards or your assessment activities or the assessment resources, the current teaching and learning and guides which are on TKI will be replaced systematically starting at level 1. One of the things that we have set as part of this, following feedback, is our intent to, for all of the internal standards, is that we will produce, or the subject expert group will produce 3 internal assessment tasks for every internal standard. So the idea being is that you'll get some clarity, you'll get some choice there of which ones that you want to use as your base assessment, and then put your local adaptation on that. And clearly what needs to sit alongside those are the exemplars. So largely the intent is that it's likely to take, you know, a year to develop these standards, and I'll talk a little bit about that process. And then we spend a year trialing them with schools. And generally speaking, we're looking at about 40 schools per subject. And coming from that, we get our exemplars. And importantly, we're also going to capture a small number of examples of teachers' work, which we hope we are able to share with others, so that you can pick up some examples, some really great examples of what some teachers have done during the school trial, and they will be put up online for people to look at and make their own adaptations, or if they want to, do their own thing, as I'm sure that many will. So to help us plan for the review of achievement standards, because as you know, there's a large number of subjects, and when you're doing a major review of 50 plus subjects and doing all the level ones simultaneously, it's really important that that flows well and efficiently. So to help us do that, we've run, and we still are running, a trial of 4 subjects, and I'll talk, just provide you with a little bit of detail. So at the moment, we've got 4 subjects: level 1 science, English, religious studies, and visual arts, which we have been taking through a process and working with subject expert groups to do that. And I'm enormously grateful for those subject expert groups who have willingly been our guinea pigs, because what we're doing in the development of new achievement standards is quite different from what has occurred in the past. The parameters are different, the starting point is different, and so we've needed to run this trial process so that we can make sure that we're getting it right, because you know, this is the work that you people will need to do, and importantly, it affects kids, and so we've absolutely got to get it right. And certainly the trials to date has shown that you know, we've learned a lot, shall we say, and hopefully when we start all of the level 1 subjects soonish, then we will be so much better prepared because of that. It's always an interesting process when you're running a public trial, because people give you lots of feedback, and some of it's been interesting and challenging to take, but that's what it's all about, and so we certainly appreciate that. So anyway, when we develop achievement standards, we do the majority of the work in 2 phases, and so just wanting to, and so when you think about the math standards which will be developed soon, then they will follow a similar process. So just sort of put that thinking on there, but thinking that this has been occurred for these 4 subjects. So for in the first phase, we developed the first set of, and I'm going to use this word products all the time, because the Ministry of Education owns the NCEA qualification, but also is responsible for developing and looking after the achievement standards. But sitting around the achievement standards is a whole lot of other pieces of material or products which contribute to and will provide support for teachers. So one of the key things that we needed to develop is a learning matrix and a rationale for that, an assessment matrix. You'll all be familiar with an assessment matrix, which is a list of standards which are appropriate at that level, and usually shows the level 2 and 3 sitting above that. So however, this time, because we are focusing on a smaller number of standards, then what we need to do is to work out what is the really important information, the big ideas, the big concepts, which we will centre our new achievement standards on. And towards the end of this presentation, Lauren will talk a little bit more about that. But that's actually absolutely new to this space. In the past, when NCEA was first established and achievement standards were developed way back in just prior to NCEA starting in 2002, the learning, what was considered to be important then was derived from the old syllabus and prescriptions and things like that. However, what we're doing now is we're basing that on New Zealand curriculum and working through with our subject expert groups and for them to identify what's really important. That's a fundamental difference, and it does put you know, a lot of onus on those people, largely made up of teachers, to do some deep thinking and working out what that is. And so it is important that when they've done that initial deep thinking, that it goes back out to the sector and we get feedback. And that's what's been happening. So, so we've completed level phase 1. The science subject was taken a little bit further because we asked the science folk to lead out a little bit further and help us work out what these new achievement standards were. Conceptually, we had a clear understanding, but we actually needed to put that in writing and what it means. So that phase 1 was completed in November and December last year, and then it went out to feedback over summer and the early part of term 1 of this year. We got a considerable amount of feedback, and that was really, really helpful. And there were quite considerable adjustments being made to the learning matrix and the assessment matrix. We've added some course outlines in there from now to help explain how all of this comes together. The subject expert groups put out their a summary of that feedback. I think if you haven't seen it on Citizen Space, if you're interested, you can go into the ministry part there and see that feedback. It was posted on March the 11th and outlines summary of the feedback, what the subject expert group, the changes that they were making, and also included some course outlines which kind of potentially helps explain their thinking in a little more detail. Okay. So we got a considerable amount of feedback. There was a lot more feedback for science because, you know, we'd asked them to work ahead, and actually they produced the first achievement standards, and so people were anxious about that. We also, at that same time, timing wasn't perfect from my point of view, but we released a provisional list, and that created some angst with the science folk, and we went through, and I'll talk a little bit about that shortly. But you can see the feedback from those various groups. Lauren was actually led the expert. She doesn't have any great religious studies background, but in actual fact, that's not a requirement because you've got teacher and sector expertise in there.
You can see we got a huge amount of feedback. It was really overwhelming at times. No, my group was amazing, and I have learned a lot. And that's one of the cool things, because we have a subject group wrapped around us. We are there to facilitate and support. But in saying that, I'm hoping to lead the maths one as well. But don't worry, I'll just be sitting quietly supporting.
Okay. Since the phase 1 material came back in, the subject expert groups in March, worked really hard to make some adaptations based upon that feedback, and then they continued their work to develop the achievement standards, the external assessment briefs, which is the material they give to NZQA to help guide them in writing the externals, whether they are exams or otherwise. They wrote the internal assessment activities. So remembering that's 3 for the 2 internal standards. And some course outlines, which are currently being posted. And started working on the extended teaching, learning and assessment guide. And that hopefully will be a really helpful product for teachers to base their planning around their subject. These and then COVID hit us, and things got a bit distracted, and my team were involved with supporting teachers around with hard material and assessment variation. Anyway, won't go into that. But what that did is it slowed stuff down big time, and so we've come back into looking at the work that the subject expert group has done. We are fine-tuning and talking intensely with NZQA to make sure that they're clearly on the same page, because they have to administer these standards. And we're planning on putting out the English, religious studies and visual arts products as per that list there for feedback in July. So if you are interested, you'll get a sense of what these newer standards look like, and because maths will follow that pattern in due course. Okay, I'm going to pause there. Any questions?
Okay, so this is, sorry, we just moved the laptop slightly to pick Rob's voice up a bit better. A question that's come through, surely better to start with the level 3 review and then work down. One of the things I'm going to touch on a bit later is how we put together the significant learning, and we did actually start with level 3 and work down. So yeah, putting together the big picture, we started with the big picture and the top level 3 and where they're heading, and then looked at where they're coming through from the up to year 10, and we worked on that as a whole. So it wasn't just start at level 1 and work our way up. It was, where do they need to get to? Where are they coming from? What is important in the middle? The other one that's come up is NCEA flexibility. Yeah, NCEA flexibility is actually really useful in this situation. Yeah. Do you want to talk about NCEA flexibility?
Yeah, look, I think the flexibility of NCEA is an absolute strength. So that because we work with achievement standards, then it enables those schools that wish to use standards from one subject alongside another subject and create their own unique learning programs, that you can, for example, achieve a certain number of achievement standards in a subject and still get endorsement, but in doing so, that flexibility, which we largely enjoy, is also its challenge in that you can see students that have done a learning program, and you might use maths or you might use any other subject, but it's a combination of standards which may not actually be that coherent from a learning discipline point of view. And it may not actually enable students to progress effectively to the next level. And subjects like maths, where you need to get a strong degree of understanding at level 1 before you are in a strong position to achieve at level 2. And so one of the concerns we have, and that we got picked up through our discussions earlier on, was that some students are getting through to tertiary level and they really haven't got some of the fundamentals. And so part of it is that we had a massive range of potential standards. And so the idea is that we work out on with the subject expert group, what is the really important stuff, and let's focus our assessment on that. By all means, teach whatever you want to teach, but actually let's be quite clear about what the important stuff is, and that's what the assessment will focus on, which then enables the student, provided they have managed to grasp that, they're well set up for the level 2 or the level 3 standards. And that's kind of the intent behind that. Yeah.
Bob, sorry, if you don't mind, I'll just elaborate on my question a little bit.
Sure.
So we're moving to 3 standards, which will, sorry, 4, isn't it? 4 standards, yeah, which will cover sort of the content that's in our curriculum. And the curriculum is grouped already to have number and algebra, and then those representations and graphs together, measurement and geometry together, and statistics and probability together. And my question was about when you're looking at creating tasks that have more than one topic within them, how will those be grouped? So currently you might have a course where you think that number and measurement go really well together, but they're not linked together in our curriculum document. Is there going to be more than one option? Or are you just talking about, from what you were saying before, are you just talking about the basic, what we're expecting at a basic level at level 1, and then teachers can elaborate on that within their courses, and that will allow you to be successful at the basic level of level 2. So I'm just wondering if there's any way for us to have more than one option to structure our courses, or if it will just be these are the 4 and that's it.
Okay, so I'm going to loosely answer your question, and then we can have a conversation a bit later. But at the moment, we don't know what those standards are going to look like. We haven't decided exactly what it is, but it's really interesting. We had some subject specialists last year look at what we call the significant learning, and that's one thing I was going to talk about, but we're actually running out of time, so I'm going to cover it here very briefly. So we looked at the big things, and some of the big ideas were things like generalization, which actually cuts across several different of our original teachings, of our learning strands. So it might be that our standards are not content-based, as you've just alluded to, but they may actually be more generalised thematic-based. We don't know yet. So there will definitely be some flexibility in there, and that is what the team will be working on, because we don't want to shut down options. But don't presume that the standards are going to be number and algebra, geometry and measurement, as we see now. I'm just going to point out to Rob that we have approximately like 2 minutes left, so pick key things.
Right, okay, thank you. I'm going to, look, we'd be really happy to receive any particular questions that people have around the provisional list, but I'm suspecting that these things are not, given a small amount of time, we are not, we're not 100% sure when we will be able to begin the large number of level 1 subjects. We're hoping that it may be towards the end of this year, but certainly at the beginning of next year. But government has needs to make some budget decisions there, and you're probably well aware of that there are some significant priorities in the country at the moment, but NCEA does need to continue. So there is our thinking at this stage, but we're not 100% sure. Okay, so.
And this actually answers one of the questions that's just popped up. At the moment, we are envisaging level 1 will stay as a combined matrix. Before I went to the ministry, I didn't realise that we talked about the matrix as it is, because I'm a maths person and it's not a matrix. So they're looking at one set of standards for mathematics and statistics at level 1. But we are proposing, and you'll see there, we've formed separate SEGs for each. We're going to ask them to apply. So those 2 groups of 8 to 10, I can't remember how many are on at the moment, will be asked to put in expressions of interest, and we'll form a large a group that's half of each roughly, and they will develop level 1. Level 2 and level 3, we are actually looking at separating out into separate matrices. So we would have a maths set of standards and a stat set of standards. At the moment, that is an idea that we've had that I may have worked with, but it would be really good to actually hear your feedback. Now, clearly, we're not going to have time to do that in this session. So if you could email it through to us, we've got the email address at the end of this, and just say, attention Lauren, and that will come through to me. Just tell us what you think. Do you think we should have level 2 and level 3 as separate? Essentially, that means you get 8, but shh, don't tell anyone. Oh, I'm seeing, good plan. So yes, it would be officially 2 subjects, but you could still pull them together to be 1 subject in your school. Remember, you create your local curriculum. We provide you with the standards to assess what you are teaching.
Can I just add something in here? When we started the trial with English, for example, there was currently there are 11 achievement standards at level 1 English, and they have now got to a position, the subject expert group, to establish 4 level 1 standards, which you'll see the details coming out shortly. And initially that was quite a challenge with them until they stopped thinking about joining their current standards together and actually started to think at a more conceptual level, the big ideas, and lifted it up. When they got to that point, then that's kind of what's in the learning matrix space, then they actually found that they could actually make some sense of that. And the subject expert group has largely settled on their 4 standards and have drafted those through. And I'm confident that the maths subject expert group will go through, first off, the challenging thing of, you should not be thinking about just joining standards together to make a bigger standard, because that's the wrong starting point. Actually, we need to go back and think about the curriculum, what's important in this subject, what is the epistemic knowledge which actually needs to be fostered in this discipline, and that's where you focus it from.
Everything is coming through very positive.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to stop and break in there, Lauren and Rob, but we have to give everybody a chance to finish off here and get back to another one if they're going off at 10 o'clock to another meeting. I want to thank you very much for everything that you've said, for giving their questions, and I'm hoping that you can see this. Are you looking at a